friends, welcome to the Econista. I'm so glad you're here. In the last video, I talked about how wages haven't kept up with worker productivity in the US. In this video, I want to dive into kind of the other side of that coin, which is employee benefits, and take a look at how these have changed over time and what benefits we've never been given that we probably should have been. So the first benefit I want to talk about is retirement. So I think a lot of us know that in previous generations, a lot of people had pensions. A pension really means that you are guaranteed a certain payout for life when you retire from your employer. So in this case, the employer bears the risk. They're responsible for managing a pension plan, for dealing with the payouts. If the market crashes, that's their responsibility, not yours. And I think most of us know these used to be more common. Back in 1960, about 30% of private sector workers had a pension. In 1980, that was actually up to 38%. And today it's about 18%. So less than half of what it used to be. And if we think about it from an employer perspective, this is really advantageous to them. So even some big employers like Sears, when it actually filed for bankruptcy, they had over $1 billion in underfunded pension responsibilities. And the CEO called this out as one of the reasons that they were filing for bankruptcy. So there really is a lot of risk and responsibility on the employer in the old pension structure. So what happened that changed us to the land of 401ks where we are today? Let's talk through the history. Okay, so the origin story of the 401k is actually pretty wild. Back in 1978, Congress passes an obscure addition to the tax code, including Section 401, Paragraph K. It's about a page and a half long. It's really not intended to become a retirement vehicle, and especially not to replace the pension system. Along comes this benefits consultant, Ted Benna. And he reads this and he has an idea that he can use this as an employee retirement vehicle in addition to the pension. So he goes out, he pitches it to clients, and the clients say no. They're like, no one's ever done this. This sounds pretty crazy. So Ted Benna gets his own company to implement the first 401k in the US in 1981. When companies see this, they start getting the idea that this is actually a great plan for them, because they can transfer the risks that they are currently taking with the pension plan onto the employee by setting up these 401ks. And within a decade, pensions are being slashed left and right, and 401ks are really everywhere. The wildest part is Ted Benna, the guy who came up with this whole scheme, has publicly called the 401k a monster that should be blown up. He did not intend this to lead to the end of pensions, basically, or to making them so much less common. And he's very critical of the state that we're in today. Okay, so with the 401k becoming so popular, that really puts a lot more responsibility on the individual employee. A lot of us know this. You have to figure out how much you're going to invest, what investments are you going to put it in, all of these different things that are really your responsibility to manage if you're lucky enough to have an employer-sponsored plan at all. And where does that leave us? Well, not in a great situation. Looking at the median workers who are at or near retirement age, they only have $88,000 saved, which sounds like not that bad until you look at what the estimates actually are in terms of what you need saved to retire. So in the least expensive state of Oklahoma, you would need $735,000. And in the three most expensive states, California, Massachusetts, and Hawaii, you need more than $1.5 million. So that is orders of magnitude off, like not even close. And 40% of Americans have no retirement savings at all. So all of this puts a lot more pressure on a system like Social Security when people don't have enough saved to comfortably retire. Unfortunately, Social Security is facing its own funding problems, which I'll get to in a later video. But what's interesting is that not all countries have a setup like this where the employee is responsible for so much of their own retirement savings. For example, I spent about a year living in the UK. In the UK, they require that your employer put 3% of your salary into a pension fund for your retirement and for the employee to put 5%. This is automatically enrolled, and actually it took me a lot of paperwork to get out of this because I knew I didn't want to retire in the UK, but it just happens without you even signing up or anything. And honestly, the UK isn't even that generous. In Australia, they require the employer to put in 12% of your annual pay away for your retirement. So it doesn't need to be the way it is in the US, where the employee takes on so much responsibility. Another benefit I want to discuss is health insurance. This is really interesting because it isn't a situation where employers are paying less and cutting the benefit. It's actually the case that employers and employees are paying more in terms of premiums than they ever have. The problem is that the price of the health insurance plans just keeps going up. And unfortunately for employees, this is actually eating into your wages. So Tufts did a study where they found that health insurance premiums are actually eating about $9,000 in wages each year. And this is back in 2019. So I don't know about you, but to me, $9,000 is a pretty significant increase in my pay. That is wild. That much is just going to cover these increased health insurance costs. And in addition to paying more for premiums, more and more employees are shifting to plans that have less coverage. So for example, high deductible plans where you have to pay a significant amount out of pocket before your insurance covers anything. Back in 2006, only 4% of workers were on these high deductible plans. Now in 2025, that has jumped to 33%. So a third of all people are choosing to be on a high deductible plan where you have to spend out of pocket before you're actually getting that coverage. And for folks on the Affordable Care Act plans, this is actually getting way worse. Deductibles increase over $1,000 on average between 2025 and 2026. They're now above $3,700 on average. And that's because of a lot of the subsidies that were passed during COVID being allowed to expire. And so when you're looking at these plans with high deductibles, honestly, in my opinion, that's almost a catastrophic plan. So this is a case where, yes, you still have the benefit of health insurance, but in a lot of cases, the coverage is more expensive and it's covering less of your out-of-pocket costs. Another benefit where US workers are not getting their fair share is sick leave and family leave. So the US is the only wealthy nation without any federal paid sick leave. All over Europe, they have it. The UK, Germany, France, Australia, Canada, Japan, all the other wealthy nations, but the US has failed to act. There's actually been legislation out there since 2005 that has been in Congress, but they haven't been able to pass it. So again, this is another instance where because the federal government hasn't acted, a lot of states have stepped in. So there's actually 19 states that have some form of paid sick leave. But again, that means the majority of states, you don't have any coverage at all required. Similar story to parental leave, where the US is one of the few developed nations that don't offer any form of paid parental leave. We do have FMLA that gives you 12 weeks of unpaid leave. So at least your job would be protected, but a lot of people can't afford to not be getting a paycheck for 3 months. So unfortunately, a lot of people aren't really able to use that benefit. Again, a lot of states have stepped in. There's now 14 states that offer paid parental leave. California was the first one to pass this back in 2002. But again, it really depends on where you live, and there's no protection that's been passed for people across the US, which is kind of crazy when you look at all these other wealthy countries that have these pretty basic benefits, in my opinion. And the last benefit I want to dig into is vacation days. So unsurprisingly, the US is the only wealthy country with no paid vacation days guaranteed to you. In Europe, it's common to have 20 to 30 days per year. In the UK, when I lived there, you were guaranteed 28 paid days off per year, including the 8 bank holidays. So basically 4 weeks of paid vacation on top of holidays. Not too shabby. And in the US, about 1 in 4 workers has no paid vacation or no paid holidays whatsoever. And this has pretty crazy results. So Back in 1979, US workers worked about as many hours per year as their counterparts in other wealthy countries throughout Europe and Canada, right? After 1979, you start to see the US really pulling away from these other countries. And it's not because we're working more, it's because the other countries pass paid vacation laws. So they're actually working less. It's now gotten to the point where US workers work an hour and a half more than their European counterparts on average. And that's primarily driven to just taking less vacation. So that's a pretty big impact. And again, it's because we just don't have the government protections and the required days off that other countries do. So in closing, your compensation isn't just your paycheck. It's a combination of your paycheck and a lot of the benefits that we've covered here today. And unfortunately for American workers, some of those things like health insurance and retirement savings have gotten worse over time. And a lot of the benefits like paid sick leave, paid family time, and vacation days, we've just never gotten access to at all because our Congress has failed to pass these laws, which other wealthy countries pretty much universally have. In my next video, I'm going to dig into a topic that I feel like everyone is talking about, but a lot of people don't really understand, and that's inflation. So I'm going to go through what is actually happening, what inflation really is, and who's to blame for the recent inflation increases. I'm Teresa, and I studied economics, so you don't have to.